The first time Jacob realized the HOA was circling, it was subtle. A letter tucked neatly in his mailbox, decorated with official-looking logos and full of demands that made no sense. But what began as ink on paper quickly turned into something much larger. A hostile takeover of the very road he had built, paved, and maintained for years. Jacob wasn't part of their club. He hadn't joined their endless meetings or paid their fees. That road, leading from the main street to his property, was his alone, written into his deed. Yet Karen, the HOA president with her pearl necklaces and iron will, saw it differently. Soon whispers filled the neighborhood. Signs appeared. Neighbors who once waved at Jacob now looked at him with suspicion, as though he was a criminal for wanting to keep what was rightfully his. And when the HOA officially declared his road community access, Jacob's fury burned hotter than fire. They thought they could take from him without consequence. They thought their rules outweighed his rights. But Jacob had a plan. And when he was done, every single one of their cars would vanish, just as they had stolen from him. Jacob lived at the edge of Elmwood Estates, a quiet corner where his gravel road wound between tall pines before reaching the main subdivision. He had built the road years ago when the land was still wild, carving it out with sweat, grit, and rented machinery. It was his pride, not fancy asphalt, but sturdy and well-kept. Proof of his independence. The HOA never paid for it, never lifted a finger to repair it, but as the neighborhood grew, more people began to use it as a shortcut. At first, Jacob didn't mind. A few friendly waves, a neighborly smile, it seemed harmless enough. But over time, the usage became abuse. Cars sped down the gravel, spraying stones into his yard. Strangers parked along the edges. And then came Karen. Karen was the kind of HOA president who thrived on control. Dressed to perfection, with pearls at her neck and a permanent smirk on her lips, she saw the road not as Jacob's property, but as a community asset waiting to be claimed. She didn't ask permission. She didn't negotiate. Instead, she appeared at Jacob's gate one bright morning, clipboard in hand, flanked by two HOA patrol members who looked more like bouncers than volunteers. "Jacob," she began, her tone smooth but sharp, "this road needs to be accessible to everyone in Elmwood. It's only fair. We've had complaints that you're restricting the community." Jacob leaned against the wooden post, arms crossed. "Complaints? About a road I built and maintain? This isn't your board's property. It's mine." Karen's smile never faltered. "Ownership is flexible when community needs are at stake. The board has voted. Effective immediately, your gate must remain unlocked." Jacob's jaw tightened. "You don't get to vote on something you don't own." Her eyes gleamed as though she had been waiting for that answer. "We'll see what the community decides." With that, she turned on her heel, leaving Jacob to stare after her. The days that followed grew tense. Orange notices began appearing on Jacob's fence posts, stamped in bold red, "Violation, non-compliance with HOA order." His neighbors whispered in driveways. Some sided with him quietly, but most avoided his gaze. Karen's narrative, that Jacob was a selfish man blocking public access, spread like wildfire. One evening, as Jacob walked down the road, he stopped at the midpoint where the gravel crunched beneath his boots. He looked at the tire tracks that scarred his work, at the deep grooves worn down by cars that had no right to be there. He clenched his fists. "They think this belongs to them," he muttered. "They've forgotten who put this here." It was then Jacob realized this wasn't just about a road. It was about dignity, about power. And if the HOA thought they could steal from him without consequence, they were about to learn otherwise. Karen didn't waste time. Within a week of her friendly warning, Jacob awoke to the rumble of engines outside his gate. When he pulled back the curtain, 3 SUVs idled at the entrance. Out stepped Karen, clipboard in hand as always, flanked by 2 HOA enforcers, Doug and Michael, towering men who wore matching navy polo shirts with the HOA crest embroidered like it meant military rank. Jacob stepped outside, boots crunching on gravel. "What now?" he asked, voice steady though his chest burned. Karen offered a sickly sweet smile. "We've had several complaints about your gate being locked. It restricts community members who need access to the road." She tapped her clipboard. By the authority of Elmwood Estates HOA, we're here to inform you that the road is now considered communal. Your gate must remain open at all times. Jacob raised a brow. By what law? Karen's smirk hardened. By order of the community. We've documented that the road has been in shared use for years. That establishes a precedent. You've benefited from the HOA's protection, and now it's time you gave back. Protection? Jacob laughed coldly. I've never seen the HOA fix a pothole here. I've paved, I've repaired, I've plowed snow in the dead of winter while your board sat cozy. Don't twist history, Karen. Doug stepped forward, trying to intimidate with sheer size. We can make this official, Jacob. The HOA can fine you daily for noncompliance. Jacob locked eyes with him. And I can sue for trespassing. Which one of us wins first? For the first time, Karen's smile faltered. She didn't like being challenged, especially not in public. A small crowd had gathered along the street, neighbors curious about the standoff. Some whispered, some filmed on their phones. Karen quickly regained her composure and turned, raising her voice so all could hear. This man, she declared, pointing dramatically at Jacob, is hoarding access that belongs to all of us. His selfishness puts our children at risk, our families at inconvenience. Is that the kind of neighbor we want in Elmwood? The crowd murmured. Some nodded. Others shifted uncomfortably. Jacob's jaw tightened as he caught familiar faces, people he'd helped shovel driveways for, people he'd waved at on summer afternoons, now looking at him like he was a villain. Jacob's temper flared. Don't let her fool you. This road is mine. It's in my deed. You want to use it. You ask me. You don't steal it, Karen shot back, her voice dripping with condescension. We don't steal, Jacob. We manage. That's what makes Elmwood Estates one of the most desirable communities in the county. You're the only one who refuses to cooperate. For a long, tense moment, silence hung heavy. Then Karen turned briskly to Doug and Michael. Take note of this non-compliance. The fines begin today. As the SUVs pulled away, Jacob stood rooted to the gravel, his fists clenched at his sides. Behind him, his gate loomed tall, locked, and sturdy, a symbol of resistance. That night, Jacob sat at his kitchen table, staring at the violation letters now piling up. Each red-stamped warning was a scarlet reminder of Karen's growing power. But instead of breaking him, it fueled him. They want to play games, he whispered, eyes narrowing. Fine, I'll end the game before it begins. 2 weeks later, Jacob's mailbox was overflowing. Violation letters, certified mail, notices plastered in red ink, each stamped with phrases like final warning and mandatory compliance required. The HOA had escalated its war. Jacob carried the stack of envelopes into his kitchen and tossed them onto the table with a sharp slap. The pile had grown so tall it threatened to topple over. He didn't even bother opening most of them anymore. He knew the script. Unlock your gate. Pay your fines. Submit to the HOA. But what chilled him wasn't the paper. It was the knock at his door that followed. When Jacob opened it, Karen stood there, arms crossed, lips painted in her usual smug smirk. Flanking her were Doug and Michael again, like watchdogs eager for command. Jacob, Karen began, her tone laced with false sympathy, this has gone far enough. Your non-compliance has cost you over $15,000 in fines. If you don't comply immediately, the HOA will take legal action. We'll line your property, and if necessary, we'll foreclose. Jacob's eyes narrowed. You think you can take my land, this road? It's not in your jurisdiction, Karen. You can't just fabricate authority. Karen raised her chin. Authority comes from unity, Jacob. Everyone here but you understands that. She gestured broadly to the neighborhood behind her, where a few curious onlookers lingered. This community is stronger than one stubborn man with a gate. For a long moment, Jacob said nothing. His silence made Karen falter, but she quickly pressed on. You've painted yourself as a victim, but we both know you're just trying to play king of the hill. Well, the HOA doesn't kneel to kings. It removes them. Jacob's reply was measured, deliberate. Try it. Karen's smirk wavered just slightly before she spun on her heel, heels clacking against the pavement. See you in court, she said over her shoulder. The moment they left, Jacob shut his door and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. Court. They wanted a legal battle. That meant discovery, lawyers, judges. And while Karen played her games with rules and intimidation, Jacob realized something crucial. She underestimated him. For weeks, Jacob worked in silence. He combed through old property records at the county office, cross-checking deeds and maps. He called in favors from friends who still worked in government offices, quietly asking for archived files. And then, late one Thursday evening, buried in dusty boxes of records, he found what he was looking for. The road wasn't just private. It wasn't platted as a community road. It had been deeded exclusively to the original property owner decades ago, Jacob's direct predecessor. That meant, by law, Jacob owned not just the road in front of his gate, but every inch stretching through the neighborhood. The discovery made his pulse race. Karen had no idea. The HOA had no claim. They were bluffing, and soon he'd call their bluff, but Jacob wasn't interested in just defending himself anymore. Karen had humiliated him, painted him as selfish in front of his neighbors, and threatened his home. He could fight her in court and win, but where was the satisfaction in that? As he set the file down, Jacob's lips curled into the faintest smile. "You wanted to play war, Karen," he muttered. "Now you'll see how it feels when you lose everything." The following Monday, Jacob did something that shook Elmwood Estates more than any HOA letter could. At dawn, he walked to the locked gate, chain in hand, and hung a fresh sign across it in bold red letters. "Private road. Trespassers will be prosecuted by breakfast." Half the neighborhood had gathered to gawk. Phones recorded videos. Parents whispered nervously. Kids pointed at the bold letters like it was the first time they'd ever seen the word trespassers. Karen, of course, was the first official to march down the road, her heels clicking like an executioner's drum. "What is this, Jacob?" she demanded, waving her clipboard like it was a weapon. Jacob leaned casually against the gate, arms folded. "It's called a boundary. Something the HOA has trouble respecting." "You're bluffing," Karen sneered. "You don't own this road." Jacob reached into his satchel and pulled out a thick folder, the very deed records he had uncovered. He flipped it open and held it up so Karen and her entourage could see the county seal stamped across the top. "According to these," Jacob said calmly, "I don't just own the driveway to my property. I own the entire stretch of Elmwood Drive. Every inch of asphalt you and your board claim as yours?" "It's mine!" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen's face went pale for a heartbeat, then flushed crimson. "This is absurd. We've used this road for decades. Community precedent overrides outdated paperwork." Jacob's eyes narrowed. "Not in court, it doesn't. And if you'd like to test that theory, by all means, go ahead." "My attorney would be thrilled!" The crowd buzzed louder, murmurs turning into arguments. Some residents looked relieved, vindicated even. Others turned on Karen, demanding answers. Doug and Michael stepped forward to shield her from the growing unrest, but Karen raised her hands, shouting over the noise. "This is nothing but a scare tactic. Don't let him manipulate you." But Jacob wasn't finished. He pulled out another paper, this one freshly notarized. "Effective immediately," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "I'm restricting access to anyone who isn't a paying easement holder. If you want to use this road, you'll need to request permission. Otherwise, it remains private." The uproar was immediate. Residents yelled over each other, panic settling in as they realized Jacob wasn't bluffing. Their morning commutes, school runs, grocery trips, all depended on the road Jacob now legally controlled. Karen's face twisted into fury. "You wouldn't dare shut down an entire neighborhood!" Jacob tilted his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Try me." That night, the HOA board held an emergency meeting in Karen's living room. Tension crackled in the air as board members argued over the fallout. Some wanted to negotiate. Others insisted on doubling down, believing Jacob wouldn't risk alienating the entire community. But Karen's pride wouldn't let her yield. "He's playing a game of power," she told them, slamming her palm on the table. "If we give in, we lose control forever. We have to break him." Meanwhile, Jacob sat alone at his kitchen table, sipping coffee as he watched the street outside grow restless. Neighbors drove by slower than usual, glancing at the sign, their faces pale. The HOA had made this a battle of pride and intimidation. But now, Jacob realized, He held the battlefield, and he had no intention of surrendering. By the next morning, Elmwood Estates felt like a pressure cooker. Cars lined up at Jacob's gate, their drivers honking and shouting. Parents were frantic, late for work, kids crying in back seats. Word spread quickly that Jacob wasn't bluffing. He truly held the keys to the road, and without his permission, they were trapped. Karen stormed up the line, her clipboard clutched like a sword. "Everyone calm down! The HOA is handling this," she shouted. But the crowd was restless. A few residents jeered. One man leaned out his car window and yelled, "You said he couldn't do this, Karen! Now my wife's stuck at work because of you." Her cheeks flushed crimson. For the first time, the control she prided herself on was slipping through her fingers. Karen called an emergency meeting right there in the street, gathering the board and her loyalists. "Listen," she hissed, her voice low but urgent. "We cannot let him dictate terms. If we cave, every homeowner will start challenging our rules. This is bigger than one road. It's about authority." Doug frowned. "But the people are turning on us. If we don't resolve this, they'll blame the HOA. They'll blame Jacob," Karen snapped. "All we have to do is keep pushing. He'll crack eventually. Men like him always do." But Jacob was far from cracking. From his porch, he watched it unfold with calculated calm. He noted every angry voice directed at Karen, every argument flaring between neighbors. The HOA wanted to paint him as selfish, but cracks were forming in their own facade. That afternoon, Karen showed up again at his gate, this time with a police officer in tow. She wore a triumphant grin. "Game's over, Jacob. Officer Miller here is going to order you to unlock the gate." The officer, a weary-looking man with gray at his temples, approached Jacob cautiously. "Sir, the HOA claims this road is communal property. I need you to open the gate." Jacob handed him the deed folder without a word. The officer flipped through it, scanning the county seal, the signatures, the notarized statement. His brows furrowed. After a long pause, he closed it and handed it back. "Ma'am," he said firmly to Karen, "he owns it. This isn't public property." "My hands are tied," Karen's smile faltered. "But there must be some ordinance." "No ordinance overrides a deed," the officer interrupted. "If you keep pressing, it's harassment. I suggest you work this out peacefully." The officer tipped his hat to Jacob and left, leaving Karen seething in silence as neighbors muttered around her. Jacob leaned casually on the gate. "You were saying, Karen?" Her eyes blazed, but she forced a tight smile. "This isn't over." That night, Elmwood was louder than usual. Arguments broke out on front lawns. Families debated whether to side with Jacob or Karen. Friendships strained, loyalties split. A once quiet neighborhood now simmered with open hostility. Jacob sat by his window watching it unfold under the glow of street lamps. He knew Karen's pride wouldn't let her back down, but neither would his resolve. This wasn't about money or convenience anymore. It was about justice. About reminding the HOA that intimidation had limits. And soon, he thought with grim satisfaction, they were going to learn just how powerless they truly were. The tension in Elmwood Estates had reached its breaking point. Families whispered at night about selling their homes. Children overheard their parents arguing about Karen, the HOA, and Jacob's gate. The once pristine neighborhood felt poisoned, every conversation thick with suspicion. Karen, however, refused to yield. She called an all-residents emergency meeting in the HOA clubhouse. The place overflowed with angry voices and restless energy. She stood at the podium, her voice carrying sharp authority. "Neighbors, this is not just about a road. This is about whether we allow one man, one selfish, arrogant man, to hold us hostage. If we give in now, Elmwood Estates will descend into chaos. Do you want to live in a community where people just ignore the rules whenever it suits them?" Shouts of agreement rose, but just as many muttered objections. A woman in the back stood and said, "Karen, maybe if you'd listened to Jacob in the first place, we wouldn't be here." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Sit down, Margaret." The meeting devolved into chaos. Voices clashed, accusations flew. Some called Jacob a tyrant. Others accused Karen of destroying the peace. By the end, the only thing clear was that the HOA was fractured, its authority bleeding away with every word. Meanwhile, Jacob had quietly prepared his final move. He had spent weeks securing his ownership rights, filing legal notices, and hiring a surveyor to map the road boundaries. What Karen didn't know was that he'd already set up a system to enforce those rights. He'd contracted with a towing company, one willing to operate discreetly and efficiently. The next morning, Jacob swung the gate wide open for the first time in weeks. Neighbors blinked in surprise as they drove through, relieved the ordeal was finally over. Karen smirked triumphantly when she saw it, mistaking it for surrender. But Jacob wasn't surrendering. He was luring them in. By mid-morning, the cul-de-sac was crowded. Cars lined the street as residents hurried back to their routines. Karen strutted past Jacob's house, throwing him a victorious glare. "Finally came to your senses, didn't you?" she called. Jacob simply smiled. Something like that. An hour later, the first scream echoed down the street. A resident rushed outside, staring at the empty space where her car had been. Moments later, another shouted. Then another. Panic spread like wildfire as neighbors realized their vehicles were vanishing one by one. Karen stormed to Jacob's porch, her face twisted with rage. "What did you do?" Jacob stepped outside calmly, holding up a folder of contracts. "I warned you. This road is private. Anyone parking here without easement rights is trespassing. And trespassers get towed." Karen's jaw dropped. You can't just—" "I can," Jacob interrupted, his voice cold. And I did. All around them, tow trucks moved methodically through the neighborhood, hauling away cars. The sound of metal chains clinking and engines revving filled the air. Residents shouted, some crying, others demanding answers. Jacob stood firm, unmoved by the chaos. "This isn't a neighborhood war anymore," he said, his voice carrying over the commotion. "This is accountability. The HOA wanted to push me. You wanted to humiliate me. Now you get to live with the consequences." Karen's face turned crimson, her body trembling with fury. "You'll regret this, Jacob. I swear you'll regret this." But deep down, even she knew the balance had shifted. For the first time, Karen's grip on Elmwood Estates was slipping. And Jacob, the man she'd tried to break, was now the one holding all the cards. The chaos in Elmwood Estates lasted days. Families scrambled to retrieve their cars from impound lots, furious at the unexpected fees. The once friendly morning waves turned into cold glares across lawns. For the first time in years, the neighborhood wasn't united under the HOA's iron grip. It was fractured, broken, distrust hanging heavy in the air. Karen, humiliated, called another emergency meeting. Only half the residents showed up. The others were too angry, too disillusioned, or too ashamed to face her. Those who did attend listened in icy silence as she tried to spin the disaster. This is temporary," Karen stammered, her usual composure cracking. "Jacob exploited a loophole. Once we challenge him in court, everything will return to normal." A man in the crowd stood up. "Normal? Karen, because of you, my car was towed. I paid $400 to get it back. You told us he was bluffing. You lied." Murmurs of agreement filled the room. Another resident spoke up, a woman Jacob had once helped clear snow from her driveway. "Karen, you've turned this community into a battlefield. Maybe it's time someone else leads." The words hit like a hammer. Karen's eyes widened as she realized the shift. For years, she'd commanded fear and compliance. Now, she faced open rebellion. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, whispering among themselves. Even Doug and Michael, her loyal enforcers, avoided her gaze. Meanwhile, Jacob stayed quiet. He didn't attend the meeting. He didn't need to. His actions spoke louder than speeches. Each tow truck, each angry resident demanding accountability, it all built the case against Karen without him lifting a finger. By the following week, the vote was official. Karen was removed as HOA president. She fought it, of course, threatening lawsuits, but her voice no longer carried weight. Neighbors who once nodded along with her demands now crossed the street to avoid her. Her empire of control crumbled, brick by brick. Jacob, for his part, didn't gloat. He didn't need to. Justice wasn't always about loud victories. Sometimes it was the quiet satisfaction of balance restored. Still, one evening, as he locked his gate, he saw Karen drive past in her SUV, her eyes burning with bitterness. She slowed, rolled down her window, and hissed, "You think you won, Jacob, but this isn't over." Jacob looked at her, calm and steady. "Karen, it's been over since the day you tried to take what wasn't yours." I just proved it. She sped away without another word. In the months that followed, Elmwood Estates began to heal. The HOA, stripped of Karen's tyranny, became a quieter, less intrusive body. Residents who once lived in fear of citations and fines found themselves breathing easier. And slowly they began to treat Jacob with something new, respect. Neighbors waved at him again. Some even apologized for doubting him. Jacob accepted their words with grace but never forgot how quickly fear had turned them against him. It was a lesson etched into the pavement of the road he now fully controlled. Standing by his gate one evening, Jacob reflected on it all. The fights, the threats, the humiliation, and finally, the triumph. Karen had tried to break him, but in the end, she had destroyed herself, and as the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the once contested road, Jacob allowed himself the faintest smile. The road was his, the peace was his, and most importantly, his freedom was untouchable.